Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. So today we're going to be talking about the possibility of a Canadian division within the NHL. Now a Canadian division would consist of all 7 Canadian teams that would exclusively play each other. Now this could happen due to COVID and the border issues between Canada and the United States, because Canada does not want athletes traveling back and forth without the 14-day quarantine. This obviously would be a big problem for the NHL and could result in the possibility of us having a Canadian division next season if next season is played. Now, my personal thoughts on the Canadian division are mixed. I think it would make for really good hockey. I think we would see some intense rivalries between the Canadian fan bases, like the Battle of Alberta, the Battle of Ontario, Montreal, Toronto. So I think it would make for good hockey, but at the same time, it would really put Canadian teams in a hard spot because for the most part, all the Canadian teams are really solid. Even Ottawa, who's been a basement-dwelling team of late, has gotten a lot better. Toronto made improvements. Calgary made improvements. Vancouver was a good team to begin with. Montreal made improvements. So all the Canadian teams got better. I think it would be a very hard division to play in. So it would make for good hockey, but at the same time, it's going to mean that good teams aren't necessarily going to get a fair shot at making it. But the best team does win, so it still would be fair in the end, but it would be a lot more difficult for the Canadian teams to get in, because who knows, maybe they don't get any wild cards, maybe they get both, or maybe they only get one. So you're at least guaranteeing that 2 Canadian teams don't make the playoffs, and obviously the easy one to say that wouldn't make the playoffs would be Ottawa, but I mean, you never know. Ottawa could come out and they could look really good with their additions of Matt Murray and of Evgeny Dadonov and if Tim Stützle plays. So it's a really interesting idea. And it's one that I think will probably happen due to the border issues and for travel in general, because it makes sense to just stay there. So there's not as much travel and players going to different states and everything. So it is safer and it does make sense. So that's why I think it's a possibility, it's a probability. Now, considering we are probably going to have a Canadian division, then might as well have some fun with it. So I think in order to rank the Canadian divisions on paper would be pretty difficult. But I think it's doable. Now, keep in mind, these are not my predictions for how I think the Canadian division would go. I will do that closer to the start of the regular season, if we have a regular season. These are just how I see the teams on paper right now. So their rosters, not necessarily how I think they'll perform, but just the makeup of their lineup. So, starting off at number 7, I have the Ottawa Senators. Now this comes as no surprise to pretty much any hockey fans. Ottawa hasn't been a very good team of late. They will be better this year, but I don't think that they will be better enough to push for a playoff spot. I think at best they're around a 500 team. They're definitely trending in the right direction, but I don't think that they're quite there yet. Their prospects still need to progress, they still need to come up, so I don't think that Ottawa is going to be looking like a serious contender or pushing for a playoff spot this upcoming season. Now, at number 6, this is going to be a controversial opinion, but I have Vancouver. Now, Vancouver, prior to the offseason, was the best team in Canada, and I'm not just saying that because of their playoff run. They had good depth at forward. Their blue line needed some work, but Quinn Hughes is a monster, and thankfully they still have him, and their goaltending. Jacob Markstrom is an absolute beast. He's one of the best goalies in the National Hockey League, and he's not easy to replace. But obviously, they didn't have a great offseason, in my opinion. Yes, they got Holtby, but I still think he's a downgrade on Markstrom. Demko could look like the real deal, but there's no guarantee with that, sorry. Demko had 3 really good games, but it's a small sample size. And I know that he's a highly touted prospect, and I think Demko will be a really good starting goalie in the National Hockey League. It's just a question of whether or not that will be this year. Up front, I really like their forward core, but my problem is within the bottom 6. A bottom 6 that got even weaker with the departure of Josh Levo, and now guys that played lower down the lineup are going to have to play higher up in the lineup due to Tyler Toffoli leaving. So, Vancouver, I still like their forward core. Bo Horvat is tremendously underrated. Elias Pettersson is a great centerman. Besser's good. Obviously, Miller had a breakout year. And I think there's more to give with Virtanen. But the bottom 6 it's overpaid for one, and any fan would tell you that. But it's also there's not a lot of offense that's going to come from that, and you don't always need offense from your bottom six to win, but it does help take pressure off of the top six guys, which could become an issue for Vancouver this year. Their defense, I like the Nate Schmidt ad. I think they got him for cheap, and Nate Schmidt is a very good top four defenseman, but losing Tanev and Stetcher means at best you balance out. So let's say Ole Juolevi can come up and take Stetcher's place. So then, yeah, maybe they're where they were before. And that's okay, but their blue line last year wasn't that good. Obviously, Quinn Hughes is a standout from an offensive standpoint, and he's solid enough in his own zone. But their team defense needs some work, their structure needs some work, and Jacob Markstrom would bail them out time and time again last season. So not having him, keeping a lot of that same defense, hopefully they can tighten up a bit, but I don't know, just on paper, Vancouver doesn't strike me as being the most dangerous team in Canada anymore. I think they could get there, but I think they've taken a step back this season and will probably bounce back in the right direction the season after. At number 5, I have the Winnipeg Jets. Now, Winnipeg has a very good forward core, and one of, if not the best goalies in the National Hockey League in Connor Hellebuck, but my problem lies with their defense. Now, Josh Morrissey's a stud. Morrissey's fantastic. He's underrated in my opinion, and he is a true top-pairing D-man. Pionk was a good addition as well. Not the most solid defensive guy, but can definitely provide points from the blue line. But aside from that, I mean, Dylan DeMello's solid, but he's preferably a bottom pair guy. And then you're counting on depth players and prospects at that point. If Vinny Hinola can come up and look like a very solid defenseman that can maybe play in the top 4, then their defense looks a lot better. But for right now, I have a lot of concerns about that blue line. Their forward core, though, is solid. I really like bringing back Paul Stastny. They got him for practically nothing, and obviously he proved that he fit in very well in Winnipeg. He should be an ideal centerman for Laine. Hopefully that might keep Laine a bit happier, and maybe he'll want to stick around. I think Mark Scheifele's fantastic. Wheeler's still good. Connor is a divisive player. Some analytics fans think he's terrible, but most hockey fans know that, well, he's pretty good. But yeah, so obviously then there's also Nikolai Ehlers and other good forwards like Andrew Copp. I like Winnipeg's team, just the blue line is a concern for me. They're a good team, but I still think the Canadian teams ahead of them on paper, reminder, are better. Now, moving on at number 4, I have the Edmonton Oilers. Now, Edmonton is an all-offense team, even though they have a very defensive coach. You look at their blue line, and aside from Russell and Larson, Barry is not a good defensive defenseman. Nurse is not a standout in his own zone. Ethan Bear is solid two ways, but I think Edmonton will once again be a very high-powered offensive team, led by the likes of Connor McDavid and former Hart and Art Ross winner Leon Draisaitl. Now, I really like Edmonton's forward core. I think the Dominic Cahoon addition was great for Edmonton. I think Tyson Barrie is a low-risk, high-reward thing, and I think Kyle Turris is good as a third-line centerman. I like all the moves that Edmonton made, but my problem lies within their goaltending. Mikko Koskinen is a decent starter, but will he be able to bear the load of a condensed schedule? I don't think Mike Smith is a good backup at this point. I think his best days are definitely behind him. I think their goaltending's weak, and we're going into a year where goaltending could be more important than ever. So that's the only thing that holds Edmonton back for me. If they found a way to upgrade their goaltending by getting someone like Darcy Kemper, I would probably have them higher on this list. But moving on to number 3, I have the Montreal Canadiens. Now, Montreal had a great offseason. They got Tyler Toffoli on a reasonable deal. They got a true backup. Now, obviously, the Josh Anderson deal doesn't look that great. Giving up Domi for him, we'll see how that turns out, but it still fit a need. And in general, Montreal addressed all the needs that they had to address. And they already looked like a solid team in the playoffs last year. Obviously, the regular season was a different story. And I just think you look at Montreal's roster on paper, there's a lot of depth there, and one could argue maybe some of the best depth for all 7 Canadian teams. They've got 3 lines they can roll that score, but they're really depending on their young centermen to take their game to the next level and take that team to the next level. If Suzuki or Kotkaniemi regress, Montreal's in trouble. They've got good depth at the wings, and they do have good depth at center, but it's risky depth in that it's young, it's inexperienced, and you don't truly know what you're going to get from it. So I think Montreal's a solid team. They've got one of the best goalie tandems in the league in Carey Price and Jake Allen. Their defense seriously improved. Alexander Romanov's coming in. He looks like he's going to be a very solid blue liner. Not an offensive guy, but still. Joel Edmondson, I think, is a good addition. He's going to solidify that blue line. He's going to insulate Price. I like adding the player. I'm not a big fan of the contract, but we're just looking at the team on paper. So I think Montreal is a good team, at least on paper, that is. I think they've got some of the best depth, and while they don't have a lot of star power unlike the other Canadian teams, I think their depth and scoring will have them hopefully higher up in the Canadian division. Now moving on to number 2, I have the Calgary Flames. Now, Calgary obviously got Jacob Markstrom, which is a really big deal because that finally gives them that true starter that they have lacked since, one could argue, the days of Mikra Kiprasov. Now, Markstrom is fantastic. He played in a poor defensive scheme in Vancouver and should probably be a lot better in Calgary under a better defensive system. They lost Brody, but they got Tanev. So, overall, they didn't make a lot of changes, but I like the changes they made, and hopefully their core can figure it out. I think they'll be a good regular season team. I think they're a good team on paper, but the question with Calgary lies in the playoffs. But I think they're a very solid team. But moving on to number 1, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the Toronto Maple Leafs are one of the most star-studded teams in the entire NHL. They've got Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, Morgan Riley. They've got all these stars. Now, defense has been the problem with Toronto for a while, but adding TJ Brody should seriously help their blue line along with Zach Bogosian. I think Frederik Andersen is an underrated goalie. He gets way too much criticism from Leaf fans. He's a top 10 starter in the league, in my opinion. He always posts solid numbers on a not-so-great defensive team. Matthews will, in a full season, he'd probably score 50. We're probably looking at a 48-game season, so 30 goals in 48 games is realistic for Matthews. Overall, the Maple Leafs have a very solid roster of players. They've got good depth with adding guys like Wayne Simmons, Joe Thornton, and Jimmy Vesey. Now, my problem with Toronto lies in how will the defense perform, even though they did add pieces that should make it better, but I think their team defense, their structure needs some work. And if Matthews and Tavares and their star players will be able to stay healthy over a condensed season, I think Toronto will be a very good regular season team. And if we do have a Canadian division, not only do I think they're the best team on paper, they probably finish atop of the division as well. Definitely at least top 3 in my opinion, and probably first. But that does it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed, and please, if you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Bye for now.